You are listening to the Stand Out Now podcast with your host, Dave Mendonca. Check out each episode as top experts share their proven marketing, publicity, and sales tips to help you cut through the advertising noise so you can reach your ideal clients, get noticed, and connect with powerful influencers. The Stand Out Now podcast is brought to you by podcastinterviewexperts.com, helping entrepreneurs attract clients through business podcast guest appearances.
My guest is the president of Leaders for Leaders, which is an organization that offers live and private workshops to teach leaders how to unite their teams, spark change, and to overcome chronic issues. He's also a StoryBrand private workshop facilitator. I took his 2-day workshop. Fantastic. Tim Arnold, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome, Tim. Now, Tim, as with every guest, we want to know what marketing, publicity, or sales strategies did you use as a kid or teenager to get the things you wanted?
I would say that, interesting, I grew up on a farm, and my first job outside of, I grew up on an acreage, and my neighbors had a large crop farm, so I spent lots of my upbringing kind of pulling weeds and helping out there. But my first job outside of that was waiting tables. So I worked in a restaurant. And so I was thinking, I think the first thing you're working on is, obviously trying to fill that tip jar, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe not overt marketing, but I think I learned at a very young age, I think I got the job as soon as I was legal to wait tables, which was 16 or 15. Just the power of authentic relationship. So not manipulative, not heavy-handed, not too much, just finding that approach where folks feel like you're all about them, that ultimately your job is to make their experience a good one. You go above and beyond, and at the end of the day, the tips are there. It's not that you're doing it just for that, but if you just deliver a service-oriented approach, you win in the end. And it's been interesting because it's throughout the different business adventures I've been on, I feel like that, servant leader or service-oriented relationship approach has been the best marketing that I've been able to kind of tap into.
So where did that come from? Was it your parents? Was it just innately inside you? Was it a boss? How did you get that understanding of authenticity and that service approach?
I don't really know the answer to that. I think that I was fortunate to, be thrown into a lot of different jobs at a young age. And I think that's a helpful thing. But I don't know if anything specifically, but, when you asked the question, I immediately went back to this little diner I worked in. And I think, I learned that just experientially. You look around and you see folks that are being relational, but it's really, I don't know if manipulative is the right word, but it's very, very self-serving. Mm-hmm. You also know folks where, they're just not going that extra mile. And, when even something as simple as waiting tables at a local diner, when you're doing it really with the intent of how do I make this customer's experience fantastic? I mean, the win is that you deliver and then the money follows.
Right.
And I think it was more experiential learning than it was anything that I was told. But certainly, I was thinking about the various businesses that I've been part of and the startups I've been part of, and I have lots of different sales and marketing strategies, but the foundation of any of them is really similar to what we talk about in StoryBrand. How do you make your customer the hero? How do you make them who the story's all about? And not as a tactic, out of a heart that just wants to serve. And, I think when you do that, and you align it with something that people actually want, you can't lose.
We'll definitely get to StoryBrand a little bit later, Tim, but I want to dig into this waiting table stuff. Now, being a teenager doing that, I don't know about you, but as a teenager, I probably wasn't the most, I might have been a little bit self-centered as a teenager. And for you to have that kind of, that mindset at that age to be of service, it just doesn't happen all the time.
I don't think I was thinking too much about it at the time. I was happy to have a job in an air-conditioned building.
Right.
I grew up in a pretty small community outside of Sarnia, Ontario. So jobs outside of farm life were far and few between. And, you just really were appreciative of it. at the end of the day, also wanted to buy a car, pay insurance. So you had that drive to succeed at a just kind of basic, not quite Maslow's lowest level of the hierarchy, but you got to get by, right? And the privilege of having a job, you just kind of wanted to give it everything you had to deliver. And I think that was the first time that I would have realized that the biggest winning strategy is just to go above and beyond to, make your customer's experience a great one, and to, work your tail off to deliver on that.
For sure. Now, let's fast forward in your career. So you've had quite a few jobs along the way. You decided to create Leaders for Leaders. Now, why did you create it? What was the gap?
Well, I got into leadership development and executive team development right out of university. So I studied to be an accountant, realized throughout my university years, especially when I started to get some co-op placements, that was not going to be where I landed vocationally. So as an outdoor enthusiast and a bit of a hack rock climber, I was able to pay rent working with a lot of different outdoor adventure-based companies. So taking corporate groups outdoors and climbing and paddling and all that kind of stuff. And quite frankly, I did it just so I could continue to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I don't know, probably a year into contract facilitating for other companies, I started to realize that, wait a minute, I really like this. I think I'm pretty good at it. And there's a need for it. So I started my first outdoor adventure-based training company in the late 90s. And for about 10 years ran a company that helped develop leaders and build executive teams, did sales training, and started very much outdoor-based, kind of adventure-based. But as the years passed, did a lot of indoor training, a lot of multi-day, multi-module development programs, and loved pretty much every day of it. But then when I was about 10 years in, did a 180 in my career. I had an opportunity to sell the company in 2007, and ended up being part of a startup that launched a 40-bed homeless shelter. So for the better part of almost 10 years, I was overseeing a 40-bed residential facility for folks that were transitioning from the streets. And, as I did that, I always did a little bit of leadership development on the side because I just love, working with leaders and teams. But I knew that the work that I was doing in homelessness was for a season. It was a chapter. And probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I realized that chapter was probably coming to an end. That season was ending. So I really started to ramp up Leaders for Leaders. And Leaders for Leaders is an organization that works with leaders, but it also is trying to encourage and foster a community where, leaders actually help develop other leaders. So sometimes that's through mentoring groups. Sometimes that's through really diverse training opportunities where you get people from all different sectors. And then sometimes it's actually just through finances. Yesterday, I actually had a rare opportunity where we were given some support by some corporate leaders to go in and do work with 50 different leaders that run homelessness services in Toronto shelters. Wow. Folks that generally couldn't do that type of work, wouldn't have the resources. And, some corporate leaders that did said, hey, let's pass it on or pay it forward to folks who, need this work as well. So we'd have to spend a day doing work with leaders in a very different space. So it's a really neat opportunity. I love what I do.
It just sounds like it's such a fulfilling thing to do. And just all your work with homeless people and whatnot, it's just, you've always had this compassionate heart, like ever since you can remember?
I don't feel that that's the case. I actually would say that I kind of might... As you're saying that, I'm thinking of the Grinch That Stole Christmas.
Oh, really?
I wasn't raised around poverty or need. We were kind of very middle class. And it wasn't actually until a friend of mine many years ago dragged me to a shelter to serve lunch, which I kind of went kicking and screaming, but went, well, I can get back for a day. And many, many years ago, that day, as I was serving, right into this gentleman, his name was Wayne, spent most of his life in the streets, and we had very, very, very many differences in our lives. But, even that first time we met, we realized we had a lot in common, and he became a wonderful friend to me, and as the years passed, a wonderful teacher. And I think realized, tapped into something in me that I think was dying to get out. And I think it's something in all of us, and that's to make a difference, right? We all want to use what we've been given to have impact and to make a difference. And I started to realize for me that, it was a very underdeveloped part of my life. And I think that was the push to kind of get out of corporate for a while and just kind of fully kind of dive into service. It actually sounds, when you talk about it in a podcast, very, noble. And actually, it was quite selfish.
Really?
It was something that I realized I needed. I needed to kind of, learn from a community I haven't been exposed to. I needed to really be a student of a part of the world that I knew nothing about. Yeah, it was a wonderful chapter in my life so far. And I think it's not one that closes. It's just you learn to start to give back and to see people that maybe you didn't see before in different ways all the time. And it was a real gift that I was able to do that.
It's amazing how you talked about that gentleman you met who was the catalyst for this change in your life. Now you're the catalyst for other people in changing their lives.
Yeah, well, you know what? I do a lot of work about this concept of polarity or give and take, and I think that's kind of how it works, right? I work in the shelter when I was there full time. We had hundreds of volunteers, and normally we'd have folks that would walk in and they would come with an intent to serve and to make a difference, and sometimes to teach a course and folks that stuck around, I would say 90% of the time, if they stuck around more than 6 months, they would truly say, wow, this has been the gift to me. This is where I come to learn. This has come where I come to actually experience what it's like to be vulnerable.
Right.
What it's like to be in a real kind of authentic community that don't hold back. And I think there's something about you give, I think, out of the intent to give and to make a difference. But when you do that, I think it's inevitable that if you do it with a good heart, you get just as much. And, I think it's part in a world where very, very fortunate and we have so much.
Yeah.
We miss that often. We miss the peace that comes just from kind of tapping into a life of service and contribution and making time for that. Obviously life's busy and we're trying to get by and support the family or whatever situation we're in. And I think it's easy to put that on the shelf, but man, everyone loses when that happens.
Yeah, no question. When you first created Leaders for Leaders, what kind of strategies did you use to attract people, like attract clients and whatnot? What did you do?
Well, with Leaders for Leaders, because I kind of slowly started it up as I was winding things down in my role as a shelter, going back to the waiting table strategy, I knew that the card that I had that just was probably the card to play first was just the relationship card, because I've been fortunate enough to, I wasn't now the 20-year-old startup kid that I was. I'm in my mid-40s, so I had a lot of really strong client network relationships that I think knew me, knew my work, knew the impact. And so I think it started with just being super deliberate about getting together with folks, picking up the phone, letting folks know that I was moving into this again full time and really looking to do it. When I was doing leadership and team development with the first company, it was kind of a wide net. I did everything from outdoor bonding programs to indoor in-depth retreats to, theater-based communication programs to you name it.
Right.
And when I came back, it was much, much, much more focused. So letting folks know kind of the focus I was having and ultimately how I would love and to have the honor of working with them and helping them to achieve their leadership objectives. And that, certainly there was a lot of other marketing and sales elements that have to happen, but that was the first and always the foremost. How do you really continue to cultivate and take advantage, not in a manipulative way, but in a win-win way, a really strong relationship network that you have.
Right. So do you do something similar today? Like I would assume today is more about referrals, word of mouth, because you've already established those relationships before. Is there any difference to the way you approach acquiring clients today?
I mean, certainly I have, when we talk in a few minutes about StoryBrand, I'll talk about, ways to get new people through the gate that maybe aren't connected to me or aren't connected to my network. So there's lots of other tactics that I do, but I'm really deliberate about being, on the phone or meeting up with folks that are in positions of, buying positions that have true leadership challenges and, continuing to learn about what their challenges are, looking at how I could potentially team with them to help them overcome them. So out of all of the efforts that I do around business development, by far it's keeping connected and being super deliberate to be connected with my core network and always asking for, it's funny, I use that, and I didn't make this up, I heard it somewhere, but any organization has raving fans, someone who they just love to sing your praises. And, thankfully I'm fortunate to have a few of those, and, just to be bold enough to say, hey, if what you're saying is true, if this impact has happened in your organization, the very best thing that you could do to help me out is just let a few of your friends know, and maybe, connect us by email, set up a lunch, and people do it all the time. So, out of all of the business development I do, that's by far the most powerful.
Most effective, right. Now, we've been just teasing your affiliation with StoryBrand throughout this interview. Let's dive into it now. Now, I've read the book, Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller. I've attended your workshop, which was great, the StoryBrand workshop. For those out there that don't know what StoryBrand is, what is it, and how does it impact a business's marketing?
A number of years ago, a client of mine in Toronto was having a multi-day retreat that I was leading, and they said, yeah, we're bringing this Don Miller guy in from StoryBrand. And my eyes kind of widened because I knew Don's work quite well, and I knew of the framework of StoryBrand, and I was already super interested in it, but I'd never been trained. So I was excited to be able to take part in this. And for 2 days, I kind of emceed the overall event. So I got to sit through Don, who's the founder of StoryBrand, kind of take an organization through this framework that helps people go from noise, just getting lots of information out there, to a compelling, clear, and concise story. The StoryBrand mantra is that if you confuse, you lose. And most organizations, with the best of intentions, are doing tons of work through web and print and podcasts and webinars and you name it. And at the end of the day, they're just continuing to confuse their potential clients, their customers, their network with just too much information. And, the nice thing is we believe that the human mind is drawn to clarity and away from confusion. And the very best way to provide clarity to any of us is through story. Story is something that we are exposed to from the earliest age. And, I got a 6 and a 7-year-old. There's not a day goes by where we're not reading or watching a story. We get story. And even now, there's very few days where, even in the midst of a very busy life, I don't carve out some time in my day for story, whether it's a bit of reading, whether it's watching a quick Netflix show. There's something in us that craves story. And I think what we crave is it provides clarity in our life. We know how stories work. And what Don's done really well is he's, through a lot of years of study, he's identified kind of the 7 steps that I would say 99% of any well-told story would follow. Stories are incredibly predictable. At the end of the day, Star Wars and Tommy Boy are the same movie. You just sub in Rob Lowe for Darth Vader and you've got the same movie. And the same is true for most of the stories that you would be familiar with, that, stories are incredibly predictable. And the cool thing is when we start to identify this formula that most storytellers use, we can use that with our organizations, with our businesses, and start to communicate through that framework. And we go from putting kind of noise out there to actually putting a story out there. And in a world where folks are exposed to 2,000 to 3,000 commercial messages a day, we can't listen to most of them. And when we connect with a story that we feel matters to us, we pay attention. So StoryBrand generally teaches folks quickly, here's how story works. Here's the 7 steps to 99% of stories that you've ever heard. And let's spend some time looking at your organization's story and making sure that once we plug your company's offerings, your services into this StoryBrand framework, that is the only way you communicate from now on.
Right.
This becomes kind of your boundaries. When I look at your website, it should totally be what's on this StoryBrand framework. When I hear you speak at an event, when you send an e-blast, it comes from this StoryBrand framework. Anything else is noise. When I work with clients around this, if I'm helping them with their website, normally when we're done, 90% of content is gone. And it's great stuff. It's great stuff. It's just not helpful. It's just noise. And what we realize is that we're just shutting people down with way too much information. And most of that information isn't remotely connected to a core story.
So Tim, take me through, okay, so I'm an entrepreneur. I have a website, tons of text, really confusing. Hold my hand here, step by step. Like, what do I need to do? Like, you're mentioning these 7 steps for clarity and whatnot around story. What can I do right now to be more clear about what I'm selling to future customers?
Okay, well, maybe what I'll do is just kind of really quickly walk you through the StoryBrand Framework,
okay,
and talk about how you could use that and kind of plug your service or your product into it.
Okay.
Or you can do that pretty quick.
Great.
Okay, so the first step in any story is that a character enters the room, whether it's Star Wars and Luke, is brought into the viewer's attention, or Katniss in the Hunger Games. There's a character that emerges as the main character. And, one thing I say with any organization is you better be clear who your character is. People say, oh, we speak to lots of different companies and lots of different characters. I'm like, that's fine, but you've got to ultimately have a story that's speaking to one. Who is your character? Who are you selling to? That shouldn't alienate maybe some fringe market groups that you have, but if you're trying through your communication to speak to everybody, you're not speaking to anybody. You're much better to have a story that has one character that you're speaking to. And what's interesting is that in any good story, within probably 10 minutes, the character has some big problem. Luke has to, defeat the Empire. Not only a problem externally, they have an internal problem. Do I have what it takes? Well, I would say to any organization, at the end of the day, you're only in the problem-solving business. That's the only reason you exist, to solve your character, your customers' problems. What problem do you solve? And if I can't see that within 3 seconds of looking at your website without any scrolling, if I can't see this is who you sell to and this is the problem that you solve, I'm looking somewhere else. The problem that you solve has to be so clear that it's called the story hook. It's like, whoa, I have that problem. You solve that problem. You provide lawn care. You help me with my finances. You help my leaders break through, whatever it may be. What problem do you solve? I work with folks and I'll look at their website and I read things like, we deal with the commodity of trust, or integrity is our middle name. It's like, great, that's just not helpful. You have no idea what you do. Tell me what problem you solve. All that stuff is noise. Here's the thing though, the third element of a great story is that we have this character, the character has a problem, but the character can't solve the problem on their own. There's always this other person who enters the story. We call them at StoryBrand the guide. So in Star Wars, Luke doesn't feel like he has what it takes, but then Yoda enters the scene. The guide's someone who has empathy, who says, hey, I get you, I've been you, I was a Jedi, and has authority. I know you can do this. I've done this myself, or I've done this with hundreds of other clients just like you. And the big paradigm shift in the StoryBrand framework is that we as organizations have to position ourselves as the guide, not the hero. The character, our customer is the hero, we're the guide. Our customer is Luke Skywalker, we're Yoda. Does that make sense? And
completely.
What happens is, and I'd say the vast majority of clients I work with, when you look at their marketing materials, when you look at their websites, when they talk about, hey, what do you do for a living? They don't mean to, but what they do is position themselves as the hero. Well, this is what we do. This is the awards we've won. This is the many years we've been in business. My grandfather started the company, and it's all great. It's just all about you.
Right.
And what we'd say is, you know what? The only time you need to talk about yourself is when it's just providing a little bit of authority and empathy for your character. The rest, it's all about them. This is the problem we solve. This is how we do it. This is how we help people like you. It's the character is the hero. Your customer is the hero. You're the guide. Does that make sense?
Yep.
After that, any good guide provides their customer with a plan. And at StoryBrand, we say, you better know how your customer goes from looking at your website to fully engaging with you in 3 easy steps. step 1, step 2, step 3. People say, oh, Tim, that's impossible. Our process is so complicated. There's so many steps. It's like, that's fine, but you better be able to provide me with 3. Under the surface, those might have lots of complication, lots of complexity. But I need to see how I go from looking at your website or talking to you right now to living the life that I want that overcomes the problem that I have in 3 steps. Set up a meeting, we come up with a customized plan, you break free and live the life you desire. I mean, I'm making this up, but
sure.
3 steps that get me from where I am with the problem to overcoming the problem through you. And in a story, if the plan for Yoda for Luke was trusting the Force, then there's always this moment in any story where the guide calls the character to action. Generally, as humans, we don't change on our own. Yeah. And even if I've got a good guide in my life and a great plan, I won't always live that plan out until finally that guide looks me in the eye and says, you need to do this now. This is your time. And I'd say with any organization, you constantly need to be calling your customers to action. You got to be moving them constantly forward and saying, yeah, this isn't just interesting. Let's do this. It's time to move forward. It's encouraging folks to actually make the call. Because in any story, at the end of the day, there's stakes. This story will either end in a tragic failure or incredible success. Either, Luke is going to destroy the Death Star and see hope for the future, or their rebellion will be crushed. I know it's dire or it's wonderful.
Right.
And as a company, we need to be super clear that your character needs to know what will happen if they don't overcome this problem. If they continue to deal with the problem that you can help them solve, what's their life going to look like? And much more importantly, what will life look like once they do? Someone moves forward with your plan, they respond to your call to action, let them know what life can look like. I want to see that in your sales copy. I want to see that in your e-blast. I want to see pictures of that on your website. I want to see pictures of a successful ending to this movie. And what happens is once we learn those 7 steps, you'll realize that 99% of any story you've ever read or ever seen follows those steps. And if you can plug in your company's kind of solution around this, that becomes your marketing and communication framework. Nothing that you do when it comes to communicating that goes outside of those steps. And you don't have to use all 7 every time you write an email or every time you talk to a client, but nothing that you say or do should go outside of one of those 7 steps. So it's incredibly hard work. And you know this, you've been through the workshop.
Yeah.
It's hard work to take this complex thing that we do and narrow it down to a really simple framework.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly, incredibly freeing once we do, because it makes communicating and marketing so easy after that point. You immediately say, hey, I just don't need to say that. That's just not helpful.
I got to say, Tim, that when I read Don's book, I sort of tapped my head my goodness, this is common sense. Why didn't I clue into this earlier about the clarity aspect and the fact that you're not the hero. It's all about your customer. It's just I don't know, entrepreneurs, is it that we just get so invested in our businesses that we sort of lose touch?
You know what? I think what happens is we start to believe that, I have to talk about myself. I've got to convince my character, my customers out there that I am better than the competition. And, we think that we need to talk about ourselves so they trust us. But what happens is we keep talking about ourselves and our accomplishments and our awards and our, this, that, and the other. And, our customers are saying, hey, that's a story about you. I'm not looking for a story about you. I want a story about me. And I don't think we create a story where our company's the hero or we're the hero because of darkness or narcissism. I think we do it because we think we have to. But what I'm learning more and more every day, because I work in this stuff constantly, is that we just don't have to do that. You need to talk about yourself just enough so your customer can trust you as their guide. Everything else is about them.
For sure. Everybody out there, listen to Tim. He knows what he's talking about. His workshop was fantastic. Tim, this has been great. Where can people find out more about you, Leaders for Leaders, and StoryBrand?
Oh, sure. StoryBrand is really easy. It's literally StoryBrand.com. We do a workshop once a month in Nashville where folks come from across the world to kind of take 2 days and go through this framework. And it's a workshop that literally is game-changing for organizations. Our expectation within 3 months is that you'll kind of make back your investment 10 times. And we find that often that's a modest goal. Folks go way more than that. So StoryBrand. You can also get me out to your organization to do a private workshop. So just go to StoryBrand.com. Leadersforleaders.ca, not com, but .ca. So leaders with an S for FOR, leaders.ca. You'll find all about my book, my work with leaders, and how I help organizations get unstuck. And it's probably the easiest way.
Awesome. Many thanks, Tim, for this.
Thank you. It's actually been great talking about it. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. All right, everybody, that's it for another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Stand Out Now podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and rate and review it as well. You can find out more about our program at thestandoutnowpodcast.com. Thanks again and enjoy your week.